Well, hey there, guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, it's part 2 of our Toys and Joys 1948 Woodie Wagon build. Well, last week's show was a long one, a lot longer than any show that I like to produce, but there was a lot of material in there and there was a lot of stuff to cover. We've got a lot to cover again this week. I'm hoping for a bit of a shorter show, so let's get right into it and head over to the bench. Well, we're going to start off today's build by making the front bumper mount. Now, this is found on the lower left corner of sheet 2. And guys, I've milled some stock for this here. It is the proper width and the proper thickness, but it is extra long because we need to cut this 3/16 deep, 5/8 long rabbet in the front end of this piece. So I'm just going to take this over to the table saw and make multiple passes in order to get that rabbet cut. We're also going to make the bumper mount uppers and the bumper mount lowers for the back of the vehicle. And using my gripper and actually the stock that we laminated, one of the offcuts, might as well use it as we can, I have cut some stock for these to make these pieces. Now guys, these are simple pieces that are 45-degree angles and they are cut to certain lengths. So I'm just going to cut these using the miter box and we can get them done fairly quickly. Now, depending on what blade you use, making multiple passes like that can yield a very rough edge here or a rough surface at the base of your rabbet. So we're just going to take a sharp 1/2-inch chisel and we'll just trim this up until it's flat. Well, I'm going to glue the pieces of this bumper together, and we can see here on the drawing that there is a distance between the end of the lower bumper mount and the upper bumper mount. And if we measure that distance is 7/16 of an inch. So using a 7/16 setup block, I'm just going to apply a little bit of glue to our upper bumper mount, and we will put these in place and then just let them dry up before we can install them. Well, we're just going to mount our front bumper mount on the underside of our chassis, and it will get mounted centered here, tight up against our front axle. And if you do the calculations, that means that it will actually get 1 5/16 of a gap between the edge of your chassis and the edge of our bumper mount. So I've set my adjustable square to 1 5/16. Just place that there like that, and then we'll check it from the other side just to be sure. And yep, it's right on. And we can just clamp this in place and let that set up. Well, our rear bumper mount assemblies are dry and we want to mount them, and that's great. But if we look here on page 2, we have a front to back here that we can measure and scale off the drawing to see the distance from the rear chassis to the flat edge of our 1/4-inch by 1/4-inch piece. But what about the spacing from side to side? There's really nothing listed in the drawings. But if we turn over to page 8, we can see here on our rear bumper outer, we can see these 2 notches. Now, while these notches are not meant to hold or have our bumper mounts go into them, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to align them with those notches. So if we scale from the outer edge here to the outer edge here, and we measure that out, that is 3 3/4 of an inch. Our body is 4 1/4. That gives us a difference of 1/2 an inch. And assuming that the bumpers are centered side to side, that means that if we want our bumper mounts in alignment with those notches, we're going to have to mount them so that they are 1/4 inch in from each side of our chassis. So for that, I'm just going to use my adjustable square. I am going to align it so that it extends 1/4 of an inch beyond the stop, and we will get these bumper mounts mounted. Well, I'm not going to lie when I say that I look at this page 3 that has all of the hood and the fender pieces on it, and it hurts my head. I'm not even sure where to start. But what I want to start with is some photocopies of the patterns. And that is what we have here. Now, guys, these photocopies are for one purpose only for me. And I can already hear you guys sighing, we need to make some templates. If you have not gotten into the habit of making templates, you are really denying yourself. Templates do several things. What they do is, for starters, they give you a way to mark out your pattern. Number two, if you should lose your pattern throughout the process of shaping, it gives you a quick and easy reference to be able to mark them again. And as well, it gives you a positive reference, say here for this hood base, that once you shape your piece, you can sit it down over your template and know that you have the shape correct, at least the size of it and the angles or the special edges correct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach all of these, every single one of them that is for the hood or the fender assemblies. I am going to attach them to most likely 1/4 inch hardboard, and I'm going to take them over to the scroll saw. We're going to cut those out. I'm going to fine tune them over at the belt sander, and when I get all of that done, I'll show you where we're going to go next. And that would be the templates made. Now, I may have missed a couple, I don't know. It's okay. If you've missed a couple, you can always add them. And if you've made one that you don't need, don't worry about it. It's great practice for the scroll saw. Now, I didn't make them out of 1/4 inch thick like I was initially thinking about. I had some 1/8 inch thick hardboard, and that's good enough. So I've made it out of 1/8 thick. So the bottom piece here, if we see on the assembly detail, the very bottom piece is the hood base. Everything is based on that hood base. Everything sits on that. So we will take the template. I have milled some 3/4 inch thick stock, some 3/4 inch walnut. We're going to place the template on here. I'm going to trace it out, and we're going to cut this, rough cut it at the scroll saw, and then sand up to the line over at the belt sander. Just the same way we did the template, except we're going to do it on the good stock. I have also decided that I'm going to start with the rest of the pieces by getting the hood center, because I believe that will be basically the middle of everything, and we can branch out from there, making sure that everything aligns as we go. So as per the drawing, I have milled out a piece of 7/16 thick walnut. I have cut it to the 1 9/16 inch height that we need, but instead of 4 3/8 of an inch, I've milled it to be just a little bit longer, because if we look here on the drawing, we can see that on the end, although it's kind of hard to detect, we have there a radius of 1 3/8 of an inch, and that will allow it to mesh to the other pieces like the windshield bottom. So I've left it a little longer for us to fine tune that a little later. So either way, we're going to line up our templates, get these traced out, get them rough cut on the scroll saw, get them sanded, and then we can move on to a couple of the other parts. And there we go. There are those two pieces made. Now you can give them a little light sanding if you want, just to take off some of the burrs from the shaping, but I'm not going to bother just yet, because we may need to change their shape a little as we go. So the next pieces that I want to make are these hood pieces here. I want to make the left and the right. And you can see here that we have an 81-degree angle. Now guys, this is exactly what I was referring to before. You cannot set your saw, nor can you set your miter gauge to an 81-degree angle. But what you can do is take your 90 degrees, which is your square cut, and subtract 81, and that will give you 9 degrees. And that will be the angle that we cut. So what I have here is I have a couple blocks of walnut that I have milled. As per the drawing, they are 1.5 inches thick, guys. This is a thick cut of walnut. So 1.5 inches thick. I've made them a little longer than the 4 5/8 and what they say in the drawings. They're almost 2.5 inches wide. So the very first thing that I'm going to do with these blanks is I'm going to use our templates and mark out our pattern. And the very first thing we're going to do for the shaping of this is we're going to head over to the table saw and we're going to cut that 9-degree angle on the end of each one of our pieces. And with those 9-degree angle cuts, we're now over here at the bandsaw, and guys, we're just going to rough this out. You don't even need to follow the curve. Just keep trimming pieces off to get the curve. In this case, I'm even just using my resaw blade, which is a 5/8 of an inch blade, which will never ever do the radius that there is on this piece. So we're just going to rough hog this out, and then we're going to head over to the sander. Well, before you start anything, we want to make sure that your table or your belt on your belt sander is square to your table. Guys, if not, you might as well forget this step because it's just not going to work. But what we have our piece here. It's rough cut. Get a dust mask on, guys. You're going to need it. Use dust collection preferably as well if you have it, and get this shaped up. We can rough shape it and just fine tune it here at the belt sander. Using a crepe block, that's C-R-E-P-E, crepe, we can clean the belt. It will prolong the life of your belt, will give you cleaner sandings and prevent burning. So some people call them sandpaper cleaning blocks, but they're really crepe blocks. So either way, guys, get the shaping done, sanding up to the line all the way along both of these blocks of wood. Well, with that, we have both of our hood pieces rough shaped. And if we hold them up to our patterns or to our templates, they fit rather well. So they're about right. However, if we look right here, we can see that there is a radius. There's shading here to show a radius, but nowhere in this section does it show what radius it is. But like I've said before, you can always go elsewhere to find measurements or to scale off the drawing. So if we go right back to our cover page, or to, our general views page, and this is the front view of our Woody. And right here, this is our hood piece. And if you're not sure which radius you're looking at, you can place your square up against where the center section of our model build is, our hood center, and that angle, that 9-degree angle, would rest against that. So you can put it up against your square to make sure you're aligned properly. And if we line up our edges and have a look at it, it is this angle right here, or sorry, this profile right here. It's just a simple round over. But if we take our shop-made circle template and get in there and measure it, just like that, we are looking at a 1/2 inch circle template. So actually that would be a 1/4 inch radius round over. So we can take this over to the router table, and on the top corner edge, we will add a 1/4 inch round over. So I think I was just a little bit off on my measuring. If you guys remember, when we made those templates, they were made a little larger to allow for the kerf of my 0.5 pencil. So this radius here was actually 5/16. So sorry about that, but I like the way that it worked out anyway. Guys, don't forget to use a starter pin with these when you're routing them over at the router table. It's very important. The next thing here, guys, on these pieces, while we haven't done this profile back here on our center hood piece, and we're not going to yet, we need to sand these 2 large blocks. Guys, no substitute here for the sandpaper on MDF. We're going to sand the top and bottom surfaces, and all of the rest here where we were doing the shaping, this is hand sanding. Be very careful not to round over this crisp edge or any of the crisp edges at these corners or here. You want to keep it very, very crisp. So get these sanded up and I'll see you when you get that done. And remember, there is no substitute for elbow grease on these ones. And there are the two hood pieces made. Now there is on this center hood, or the hood center, according to the prints right around here, there is a 1/16 round over. And guys, I don't have a 1/16 router bit. And not only that, it is so tiny, it's hardly worth talking about. So that you can hand sand. Some 180 grit sandpaper will make pretty short work of it. And because you're not really sanding like crazy, you should be able to get it pretty even all the way along. Well, before we carry on with any other pieces, now that we have our hood pieces done and we have that round over around our hood center, I think what I want to do is I actually want to assemble this together. Well, it's been a couple days and these pieces are dried up. However, we do have some uneven edges here. Our base is sticking out ever so slightly from our hood pieces. So I'm just going to take this over to the disc sander and very carefully we're going to trim this up down here so that it is flush with the hood pieces that we've just made. And there we go, we have this all evened up. It looks like there is a little bit of discrepancy right down here along the glue line. But for some reason, the hood is actually beveled right there at the bottom. But if you put a square from the bottom edge right across, we can see that it's perfectly square. And there is that little divot here by the glue line. So the fault is in the hood, not in the base. So at that point, you don't want to continue sanding because you're going to change the shape too much. So just a quick note on sanding. We're going to go right back to the basics here, guys. I know that this is old hat for a lot of you, but there are some of you out there that won't realize this. When you're sanding this hood, your grain on the sides is running this way, and that's fine. If you want to take your sandpaper, I've already got this sanded, so I'm going to use the back, and sand along here and then sand this profile. That's fine. You can do that without an issue. But as soon as you come over to the top and you start sanding along this profile, back about the last inch here, you're running with the grain. Once you start getting beyond that, the grain is running this way and you are now cutting across the grain. And what that's going to do is it's going to leave scratches all the way across the corner of your hood here. That's going to show like crazy once you add a finish to this or just in the general model. So you don't want that. You want the best, smoothest result you can get. So this is 220 grit. So the way you want to sand this is place your sandpaper down onto your hood and sand. And when you sand, let the curve or the natural softness of your fingers roll over that edge as you're going along with the grain. And that will go a long way to not crossing the grain with your sandpaper. There's a reason that quarter sheet sanders go all over the place, and it's not so that they can take off more material faster. It is so that it is kind of doing circular motions so that as it's making those microscopic scratches across the grain, it's also removing them. So random orbitals do the same thing, but when you're sanding by hand, you want to make sure, guys, back to the basics, right along with the grain. Okay, so this piece here is done. We now want to move on to our fender supports. We need a right and a left. And that would be this little template here. Now, look at the drawing here, guys. Something so important to note, sand to fit. And if we look at our assembly detail right here, it goes right in the front. It goes butted up against this flat square front edge of our hood base, but as well, it fits perfectly along this line that we just sanded and trued up to our hood. So, sand to fit. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that Toys and Joys is too lazy to put the pattern perfectly. What it means is that they can't guarantee that you followed the pattern perfectly. They can't guarantee your work. So for that instance, I will try this here with the template. You know what? It's not a bad fit, but there is some gaps at the back and at the front. The rest isn't too bad, actually. It's pretty good. So what you want to do is once you get your piece almost done, cut way outside this line, and then use your vehicle. You know that according to the drawing, it's 1 inch across the front. So on your good piece, measure 1 inch across, mark it, line up your vehicle itself, and use that to trace the inner edge. I don't think we need a video of it. It's a pretty simple piece. It is 1 1/16 inch thick. I'm just going to rough cut it either at the bandsaw or the scroll saw. I haven't quite decided yet. And we do have this 5/16 inch roundover that we can put on it as well. That is just on this front edge for some strange reason. I don't know why that's there, but it's there. Again, for that, starter pin, guys, or you can cut a block that is larger and route that and make it from there. Now, for me, I'm going to be using the offcuts from our hood. So it's thick enough, it's wide enough, and it should be long enough that I can put the routing on first before I start doing all kinds of crazy shaping. So let's get these fender supports done, and then we can move on. And there are those two supports done. Now guys, they can be glued in. We can place them in the front here. I'm using my straight edge at the back to support this piece so I can put some pressure on it. And we're going to take the edge of a square, place it up against our hood base, the flat section here. We're going to push it in tight, and then we'll glue these in place, making sure that this front edge still remains true all the way across as being straight. Now guys, we got back to a little bit of the basics with the sanding, explaining about sanding along with the grain to avoid scratches. So I just want to show you something here that is something that I consider, again, something that is basic information, but not everybody might utilize or not everybody might know. We know that those front end fender extensions, or those supports rather, had that 5/16 radius on the front edge. Well, how do you know if your bit's not labeled? How do you know that it's a 5/16 radius? Well, if you take a 5/16 radius and put it on a compass and draw a circle, the circle you're going to get is going to be a 5/8 inch diameter. So you can take a 5/8 inch diameter dowel and just place it here in the cutting edge of your router bit. And if it fits in there cleanly with no gaps, if the edge of the cutter touches all the way along the edge of your dowel, you know you've got a 5/16 bit. If you have a 1/4 inch radius, that would be a 1/2 inch dowel, and you would do the same thing. You could take a 1/2 inch dowel and test it in here. A 1/8 radius, that's a 1/4 inch dowel, and you could place it in. And again, if there's no gaps and your cutting edge fits cleanly against the edge of your dowel, you know you've got the proper bit. And unfortunately, guys, that's all the time that we have again for this week. We've made a lot of great progress here. Some of those pieces, those front end pieces, the hood, the fender extensions, all of those ones, the ones we made the templates for, they can be tedious and tricky pieces. Those supports alone, those two little triangles that went in the front end with that 5/16 roundover, guys, I worked on that for almost 2 hours to get 2 of them made. They are time-consuming pieces. So take your time, sit back, relax, put on some music that you like, and just enjoy the process. There's no rush here. We're not in a hurry, and rushing leads to kind of anxiety, which leads to not paying attention, which leads to dangerous things, and which leads to injuries. So let's not go down that road. Take your time. Either way, guys, I hope you've enjoyed the content today. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. If you've enjoyed today's show or found any of it useful, hey, why not like and subscribe to the channel? We have an amazing audience base, and I'm hoping that you're going to consider becoming a part of it. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed the content here so far today. I hope that you're going to get a set of these plans for yourself and follow along at home. I hope that you were able to pull something positive away from today's show, maybe an extra little tip or something like that that you can add to your arsenal of woodworking knowledge. And more importantly, guys, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.